we were also, thanks to ERA, able to sample some produced water as well. So we want to thank them for their cooperation. This is a slightly busy slide, but let me kind of work through some of it. The two major points I want to make here is we can distinguish between methane that's generated by heat and methane that's generated by microbes. And methane that's generated by microbes will have properties that fall in the box that's up at the upper left, and methane generated by heat will have properties that falls in the box on the lower right. And the produced water samples that we were able to take fall in the lower right, as we expected. And you can see the other samples that we took are squares. And you can see that there's evidence of stuff that's between the boxes shows mixing. There's mixing going on between surface water, which is typically affected by microbial methane, and oil and gas fluids that are affected by heat. And so those samples in between those two boxes represent mixing. And the green stars are from USGS Energy Database. They're gas samples taken from producing oil wells. So you see that some of the oil wells actually fall into the microbial box. Why? Well, actually, I mean, when they take their produced water out and they filter it, you know, they add some biocides because they get stuff growing in it, and they don't want to clog their wells. So we know that we have microbial growth in some of those fluids. So, so the story here is that we can see differences. We can see produced water where it should be, and we can see mixing. So we think that this tool is going to be able to help us figure out those areas where there is heat-related sources of groundwater. So you asked about how this is kind of gets to the guts of our suggestions for where would you monitor. And our conceptual model is for zonal isolation, you want to look at stuff coming up and stuff coming from the side. That's what we mean by, and not necessarily, we say quasi because it's not so easy always. It can be, you know, it can move different questions. And the key questions are, so where are the boundaries between, you know, protected in water and oil and gas? And are things crossing those boundaries? What rate, what direction, timing, and what is the overall risk, and what is the timing of a potential risk? And this is just kind of a conceptual model of, you know, gradients, flow gradients, and two-dimensional planes of flow paths that can exist underground, and how we would think about putting wells in for long-term monitoring. So to summarize, we're suggesting a 3-component regional monitoring program, and we're suggesting the zonal isolation component be the top priority. We're suggesting using the same analytical suite of constituents everywhere, and we developed this library of end members and source characteristics that can be used not only in this program but also by the regional boards looking at site-specific incidents. The products, such as this 3-dimensional mapping of salinities, will also support long-term underground injection program management in addition to the SB4 program. And that it's really key, I think, to recognize that a site-specific approach is going to be required because every place is going to be different and the risks are going to be driven by the differences. Like I said, the two major time factors are the availability of wells to sample and whether or not we can have access to the information that oil companies have already synthesized and developed. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them, and I may defer them to my colleague if they're not in my area of expertise.
Great. Again, thank you all. I repeat, a lot of light where there's been a lot of heat. I feel like I just went to school for a couple hours. Great. I mean, I knew a lot of it, but I learned a lot too, which thank you for laying that out. Do board members have any questions before we go to comments? I'm sure we'll have some comments. No comment cards?
So I think I can explain that.
After the next. All right.
So we had originally designed this so that the technical questions and comments could be dealt with and in one session, and the policy comments could be dealt with in the second. But I can understand that folks are more interested in talking about the policy issues.
Oh, or they'd like to just have to get up and comment once. It's somewhat
Sure.
efficient. Mind if we take, just out of courtesy, in the mid-morning bio break, a 10-minute
Not at all.
break? I mean, I realize some people are eager to speak and get out, but it's courtesy. This is past the zone. I should have taken a break, but I didn't want to break the flow. Yeah, it's a
Yes.
different zone of isolation. We can come up with all the metaphors from this we want. Drilling down in the data was my favorite one earlier today. So we will take a 10-minute break. Really mean it.
Great job.
we're going to be starting up again. Just to show Fran I'm capable of meeting the time schedule that I set out. That's why I did it. We'll split it with you. All right. So how we doing? Yeah, we're already behind schedule, so. Once we do this, then they can get hopefully we can get through the public, I hope. So. Well, even yeah. I have some issues on my for today. I'm right with that.
Okay, great, thank you. Are we waiting for?
We're just trying to do a slight scheduling thing to give people some sense. Our sense is that we're not going to get to the listing policy until after lunch, so that all of you who are here for that may get to North Coast. That's sort of a goal. It all depends. But we'll probably take some sort of a lunch break before. It may be short, but I'll defer to my colleagues on that. All right, with no further ado, sorry for that interruption.
Right.
And you're both wearing your waterboard lapel pins, you just seem so, I know, I'm going to go get mine.
Official.
Yeah, very official.
Well, good morning, Chair Marcus and members of the board. I am Janice Sinke. I'm the unit chief of the oil and gas monitoring unit here at the water board. And I'm joined by John Borkovich, who you met earlier, chief of the groundwater monitoring and assessment section. So we are here today to update you on the status and schedule for the development of model criteria for groundwater monitoring related to oil and gas production. So our presentation will start with a general background on information on Senate Bill 4. We'll go over some of the interim groundwater monitoring activities that we've been conducting. We'll review details on the model criteria, general details, and we'll discuss the schedule for development and implementation. So the Division of Oil and Gas Geothermal Resources, also known as DOGGR, released draft regulations for hydraulic fracturing back in 2013. Those regulations did not specifically address groundwater monitoring, and there's public concern about hydraulic fracking and the lack of information on potential impacts to groundwater. So as a result, Senate Bill 4 was passed and signed into law in late 2013. In general, it requires DOGGR to develop regulations regarding well construction, maintenance, and chemical disclosures. And it also requires State Water Board to develop the model criteria by July 1st of this year. So since January 2014, State Water Board staff, we've been working with DOGGR to implement the provisions of SB 4. And in late 2013, we worked with DOGGR to draft up their emergency interim regulations. We specifically helped them with the groundwater monitoring interim regs as well. And as part of the well stimulation permitting process now, well operators, as you've heard before, are now required to either include a groundwater monitoring plan or a letter of concurrence from the water board staff that states that we concur that there isn't any protected water to monitor. So also in addition, we've worked with DOGGR to develop an MOA related to the well stimulation regulation activities. So far we've worked with DOGGR to review 28 groundwater monitoring plans. 20 of those groundwater monitoring plans have been processed as complete by DOGGR. In addition, we've reviewed 31 requests for written concurrence that protected water doesn't exist in the vicinity of the well to be stimulated, and we have issued 20 letters of written concurrence. The groundwater monitoring plans, these plans and written concurrences are associated with over 1,000 well stimulation permits that were processed in 2014. And as you saw before, the majority of the well stimulation occurs in Kern County, and that's where the majority of the associated groundwater sampling and monitoring occurs as well. So here's a map, a close-up of the southern San Joaquin Valley, and the green squares indicate where we have granted written concurrence that groundwater monitoring is not required. And the blue squares indicate where the groundwater monitoring plans have been approved and processed by Dogger. So as you can see here that the majority of the groundwater monitoring and the activities for written concurrence are in Kern County. So operators now need to notify via third party property owners within 1,500 feet of a well to be stimulated. And if the property owner elects to have their water sampled, they may choose a third-party designated sampler. And as of today, only one property owner has requested their water to be sampled.
That was a stream sample collected in the Fillmore area, and that map previously excluded that just for size purposes.
Largely because there are no people there?
Largely,
Okay.
yes. They're in the fields, the Lost Hills, Elk Hills, Belridge. There aren't many property owners within 1,500 feet of those wells being stimulated.
And it's a voluntary system, so if someone gets a notification, it's up to them to decide to contact the designated sampler.
And is there any data result from that Fillmore?
We do. We've looked at the data. It shows elevated TDS concentrations and a couple other, I think boron was a little high. Nothing red flag. So aside from the SB4 well stimulation activities, we've been working on several other oil and gas related activities. In brief, these activities have included working with Dogger to review aquifer exemption submittals. We've been evaluating existing underground injection wells that may pose a threat to public health or water quality. We've been reviewing underground injection well project proposals, and also in addition, the regional boards are evaluating the oil and gas produced water ponds. So this map, as you saw, was previously shown by USGS, and it shows us that water supply wells are co-located with oil and gas wells in areas of the state. And what we've been learning and reviewing depth information about the injection wells or other wells that we've been looking at, that there are oftentimes areas where the depths of the wells are completed at similar depths as USGS was indicating before. So now we'll review the development of the model criteria and where we are with that. So we're required under SB4 to develop the model criteria for groundwater monitoring by July of this year. And we're required to implement the regional groundwater monitoring by next January. So in general, the model criteria are to protect all waters designated for beneficial uses and prioritize monitoring of groundwater that is or has the potential to be a source of drinking water. And that was specific in SB4. So similar what we did for the nitrate report to the legislator, where UC Davis was our technical expert and provided recommendations. Lawrence Livermore is now our expert on this project and will be providing us with recommendations for the model criteria. We'll then develop the final model criteria based on those recommendations and in consultation with Dogger and public stakeholders. And also, USGS is doing their work since there really isn't a lot of information out there regarding any potential effects. So they're helping to collect and analyze the data to help develop the regional groundwater monitoring approach. So as you've heard before, the components of the model criteria, though there are actually two main components. It would be groundwater monitoring near stimulated wells that will be conducted by the operator, and the regional scale monitoring that the State Water Board will do. And the model criteria is going to include monitoring methods, chemicals to analyze, if you've heard before, frequency and duration, and areas to monitor. So project timeline, we kicked off the development of the model criteria by hosting 2 public stakeholder meetings last August, one in Bakersfield and one in Los Angeles. And that provided the public and stakeholders from oil industry, EJ folks, agricultural, local governments, an opportunity to voice their ideas and concerns. Last December, our lead expert, Lawrence Livermore, also hosted a public meeting here with some of their experts who attended, and they also had a chance to hear from the public and stakeholders as well. So we have our information item today, and then starting April 29th, we will be releasing our draft model criteria for a 30-day public comment period. Next May, the State Water Board will host a workshop on the 20th to present the draft model criteria and receive board member feedback and hear once again from the public and stakeholders. The final model criteria will be posted again in late June for a 10-day public comment period. The Water Board then is scheduled to develop the final model criteria at the July 7th board meeting. And we will begin implementation of the regional groundwater monitoring by January 1st of 2016.
Now, are you, do you have in your schedule anywhere sharing the data with CASGIM? I mean, do you do that, or is that a consideration that you've had?
So we are obviously information back and forth. This is about developing the criteria that we would require the operators to do, or that, and additionally, what we're going to task USGS to do under our contracts for the regional monitoring. It's not about the results of the data yet.
So with that, that concludes our information item. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I think that's where my house is. I'm told that's what it used to look like.
I think that's Huntington Beach.
House is, but it didn't.
So as you can,
That's closer to your house. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. And look. Well.
so as you can see, we're under
Resolve that before we propose something.
I think
just
so,
want you
yeah.
to know. Yeah.
we're under a very tight time frame. We under this time frame, we've tried to allow for as much input as we could and still meet the legislative requirements of having this be completed beginning of July. But as you can see, we have a 30-day time frame for us to take the information we heard today and turn it into criteria, and then a 30-day time period for folks to comment on that. We will turn around as fast as we can and put out a revision prior to the board meeting, but it is extremely tight. I think
But
that
it's a fast pace. I know some people think it's too slow, but
so
always
it's
a tough balance.
between the trash policy we heard yesterday of 8 years and the emergency regs that were 2 weeks, and so it's somewhere in the middle of that. But it is.
So maybe it's just right.
It's going to be pretty tight, and but we will do the best we can.
Very much. Not going to give you a hard time because it's your birthday. Not that it would be warranted anyway. Are there any questions of staff before we go to comments? All right. Our first commenter, we have 3 cards. If you haven't put in a card and you wish to speak, please do so. 3 comments. The first is Andrew Grimberg from Clean Water Action, followed by Ash Laut from the Center for Biological Diversity, followed by Bill Aliod from the Environmental Working Group. Thanks for being with us this morning. Hi.
Thank you. My name is Andrew Grinberg. I'm the Oil and Gas Program Manager with Clean Water Action. First of all, just really want to thank all the presenters today for sharing a lot of really valuable information, doing a lot of great work over the last few years since SB4 has passed. We at Clean Water Action definitely appreciate the magnitude of this task that staff has put in and will be continuing to work on for quite a while on this issue, and all the folks involved at LBNL, LLNL, USGS. As far as the monitoring criteria, we really do support the broad approach being proposed today, looking at all the potential impacts from oil field development, whether it's injection wells, production wells, fracked wells, waste disposal of all types. One thing I didn't see on there and maybe want to consider is the transportation of waste fluids, whether it's in pipelines or trucking, and I don't know if I saw that on the contamination pathway list presented earlier. One thing I would like to point out, and I think Janice, as one of her last slides showed, what the purpose of this is. It's to identify problems in order to protect beneficial uses. And what we're seeing is a lot of potential problems, and that's one of the reasons that groups like ours still do support a moratorium on fracking at this point. It's another reason why we've been calling for the shutdown of all the illegally permitted UIC injection wells, which are injecting directly into federally protected sources of drinking water. And we're still searching for questions as to why those are allowed to remain open. And, as the state water regulator, we would encourage you guys to weigh in with Dogger and, the administration and try and figure out really why we are leaving those open when we've detected a potential threat to beneficial use water. The other piece, and a number of us have talked previously, and I've even visited some of these facilities with some of you, are the open pits. And what we see is really the first cut of this groundwater monitoring program identified them as a potential issue, and we don't see a need for this type of disposal method to be used in California. And we've sent in a letter requesting the immediate closure, and we appreciate the work the Central Valley Board is doing to start regulating these. We do believe that that is not an aggressive enough approach when we've got really nasty stuff being dumped into open pits with limited safeguards in place. It's also an issue that has resonated with our membership and the public. I brought with me a stack of, I believe it's 566 handwritten letters from our members, all calling for the immediate prohibition on surface disposal into open pits by the oil and gas industry. So we would encourage that as we find these problems that we deal with them aggressively and make sure we're protecting water. Would like to just finish by thanking everyone involved in this process, and also keep an eye out for some legislation which could further these goals of getting more information. Assembly Bill 356 from Doss Williams would expand the data and close some of these data gaps that were identified today by requiring information on injection wells and requiring the groundwater monitoring programs being developed under SB4 mesh really well with some of these other potential impacts. So, appreciate the time to comment, and I'll hand these off so you guys can respond to them accordingly. Thanks.
Next is Ash Laut. Tell me if I pronounced that right.
Thank you, board members. Again, my name is Ash Laut. I work with the Center for Biological Diversity. In light of California's historic drought and frightening drought, I ask the State Water Resources Control Board to stand up and protect California's most precious resource, its water, and to push the Brown administration to immediately shut down the hundreds of illegal injection wells dumping toxic oil waste into protected California aquifers. California communities have been ordered to make huge water use cuts to fight drought, but the state's plan lets the oil industry completely off the hook, even as Governor Brown and this board vow to leave no stone unturned. Oil companies that use and contaminate huge amounts of water are getting a free pass. In 1 year, the oil industry uses as much as water as San Francisco does. Excuse me. Governor Brown and this board must also stop oil companies from contaminating California's underground water. Hundreds of oil industry disposal wells are dumping oil waste into scores of protected aquifers from Monterey County to LA. Every day, illegal disposal wells dump 27 million gallons of oil waste into protected aquifers. Governor Brown and this board must stop oil industry from polluting our precious water supplies, or California will bitterly regret this inaction in the dry decades ahead. Using water for fracking and extreme extraction isn't the same as using water for household tasks. That water is cycled back into the overall water supply, while water used for fracking and extreme extraction is typically too contaminated to be used again for things like irrigation or drinking. Fracking flowback fluid is a key part of the oil industry wastewater stream and can contain toxic metals, volatile hydrocarbons, and naturally occurring radioactive material. Recent oil industry tests of this flowback fluid have found dangerously high levels of benzene and cancer-causing elements and hexavalent chromium, in addition to other harmful chemicals. Benzene levels were on average 700 times and as high as 1,500 times the federal limit for drinking water. Dogger has known about the toxicity of wastewater for some time. Dogger's own 1993 study on produced water found extremely high levels of benzene in their sampling. Cancer-causing chemicals have no place in California's water supply. These chemicals harm the health of future and current generations. The oil industry is contaminating California's water supplies and violating federal law on a massive scale, and that it needs to end now. The size of this problem shows how big a threat oil industry's toxic waste is to California's precious water supplies. It is indefensible that our governor and this board are allowing the oil industry to continue business as usual. California state top officials, including your own Chief Deputy Director, Jonathan Bishop, admitted that illegal injection has and is still occurring. That means that California's water is knowingly being contaminated in the midst of one of the state's worst droughts on record without appropriate recourse. This revelation comes as California's agricultural industry copes with a drought crisis that has emptied reservoirs and cost the state $2.2 billion in 2014 alone. The lack of water has forced farmers in the state to supplement their water supply with underground aquifers, according to a study released by the University of California, Davis. Once an aquifer is contaminated with this fluid, it can be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to clean up. Given that California is also experiencing the worst drought in 1,200 years, it is hard to overstate just how thoroughly the regulatory system has failed. We can't afford a prolonged phase-out of illegal injection or new aquifer exemptions. We need this board and Governor Brown to act immediately to halt these ongoing illegal activities. A plan proposed by your fellow agency, Dogger, will allow injection into potentially non-exempt aquifers to continue up for 2 years while those aquifers are being evaluated. This is unacceptable, and this outrageous plan could permanently destroy scores of California aquifers. During this historic drought, Governor Brown's regulators want to let oil companies continue violating law by dumping vast amounts of toxic waste into our precious underground water. Every day that this board and Governor Brown allow these wastewater wells to continue to operate, tens of millions of gallons of toxic wastewaters will be dumped illegally into protected aquifers. If the oil industry fouls this precious resource, it'll be lost forever. In conclusion, I ask the State Water Resources Control Board to, again, stand up to protect California's most precious resource, water, and to push the Governor Brown's administration to immediately shut down the hundreds of illegal wells dumping toxic oil waste into protected California aquifers. Thank you.
Alia?
I'm Bill Alio with the Environmental Working Group, or EWG. First, hats off to the presentation. We love science in policy and government, and there was a lot of science. It's good to have, and we thank SB4 for creating this opportunity, and before that, Senator Wachowski, then Assemblyman Wachowski, kicked it off with trying to regulate fracking. But we've come a long ways. It was, let's get fracking regulated, but in doing that, we started looking at the oil industry and how it's regulated in general. When I came into Dogger's offices 2011, they said, we don't really have air quality expertise, we don't have water quality expertise, so now we have the people with that expertise working on it, and that's all good. But the MOU or MOA signed between this agency and Dogger back in the 80s still exists. I know you've rewritten it now, and that's good. And the state board was supposed to take care of the surface stuff, and the Dogger, the injection below ground. On the surface area, we agree with Clean Water Action. Open sumps should not be allowed in Kern County, period. Look at the air quality in that county. If I lived there, I'd be jumping up and down saying, what are we doing polluting our air worse by the VOCs that are coming up from these and the threat of groundwater pollution. On the subsurface level, we think Dogger has somewhat failed too with the underground injection control program and the injecting into non-exempt aquifers. And we also agree with Clean Water Action and CBD on shutting them down. We haven't heard a good rationale for why they're allowing these wells to continue. And I don't know if you're talking to them and there's an agreement or what, or EPA, I'm not sure what they're going to do, but I just haven't heard the rationale. As Mr. Grinberg said, we're searching for answers to why this is still going on. In terms of moving forward, I think it's really interesting to see the science and how you deal with these different oil fields, because a lot of in the past, when I started working on this, the oil industry was characterized, Kern County is basically a desert, and there's not much groundwater worth keeping. I've known from Mark Nekadem, the Director of Conservation, was at a Chevron field on the west side, the deserty side, saying they're pumping good groundwater up to use right there for steam flooding. There's good groundwater all over the county, and here we are with injection wells polluting it. I don't get that. I think the Rose Field is maybe most interesting of all. That's just north of Shafter, and they're fracking down at about 8,000 feet, and there's high groundwater or shallow groundwater being used by the farmers. But if you look at what goes on in a typical oil operation there, they're allowed to bury, just use a bulldozer and bury drilling muds and cuttings in these called mud sumps. So when they're in the initial well production or exploration, they're allowed to just bury that, mix it with concrete and bury it. That's a surface discharge that the regional board allows and has allowed. And now they're starting to look at this and clamp down, but I'm saying this has been the picture. You bury all these first initial toxic stuff, heavy metals in the drilling muds. Then you are allowed to inject into the mid-level, as the graphic showed in the science presentation. But we're told also injection wells put it way below the level of groundwater. It's not. They're injecting the groundwater all over the county. But even there, what if the farmers start going deeper? Geez, well, we know they're doing that all over the southern San Joaquin Valley. They used to go 100, 300. Now they're going 2,000 feet. What if that Rose Field, they decide we need to go down 3,000, 4,000 feet to get groundwater? So is Dogger permitting something that's valid, scientific, and where it should be today, even though the fracking's occurring at 8, the current wells are 1 to 500 feet? I think it's really important. And look, the Rose Field again, I think is a distinctive look at what we're doing there with the temporary pits, the disposal, and then open sumps. There aren't so many up there, but as in the west side. Lastly, a footnote on the Monterey Shale. It's really the Monterey Formation, and I'm at risk because there's PhDs with geology in the room, but it's not always deep. It rotates around, and in some parts of the state it comes right to the surface. You can see aspects of the Monterey Formation in the Oakland Hills above Berkeley, and you can see it offshore right along the shoreline sticking up in where the wave action is. In other places it's thousands of feet down. It's like a roller coaster ride, and that thankfully is one reason it's not easy to exploit, because you can't go down and horizontally frack very easily at all, as well as the shale formations that make up the Monterey Formation aren't easy to give up their oil. It gives it up easier when it's squeezed for 1 million years and forms something a little higher up, like in the Kern County area. So again, those are some of the stereotypes of Kern that we're seeing are broken down, and it's great to see your involvement, but again, the most pressing issue now is the injection well, in my opinion, and the open sumps. Something must be done about this. Business as usual is no longer going to happen in there. And I want to add another thing, is the oil companies have been very mostly forthcoming and cooperative in this whole thing the last 4 years. They opposed the initial fracking things, but and backed off. Halliburton, the providers, backed off, and we have I think the best law in the country. and I'm glad to see it being implemented before our very eyes. It's a difficult process, and we're in a transition phase now, getting to where we need to get. But in the interim, I think there are some pressing issues. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know a number of you have also put a lot of time in on this. So Tam, take it away.
I just want to ask Jonathan for a clarification with respect to the MOU with Dogger. There was a comment made that we've updated that. I don't believe that's the case. Could you?
That's correct. We actually have 2 MOUs with Dogger. One on the SP4 on the stimulation activities, which was just adopted in, signed in December, end of December, beginning of January. We have an existing on general oil field operations that was from 1988, I think is the date, and we are working on updating that, but it is still the same one.
Any time frame and what, given the discussion we had in December with respect to the SB4 MOU, what is the process you intend to take to ensure some input as appropriate from the various interested parties?
So I don't have a time frame right now. We are running extremely fast to keep up with the issues that are coming up with interim permitting and aquifer exemptions that you've been hearing about, and developing the model criteria. I don't expect us to be able to get to really serious thoughts about that until we get the model criteria through in July. So, but we will be providing it for public comment prior to proposing it for option. We heard that loud and clear the last time, and so we'll be doing that. But I caution you, I know that we'd like to get everything done at once, but we just aren't going to be able to focus on that until we've dealt with this other issue. And so that'll be in this summer that we'll be having some breathing room to do that.
Well, I would also add, I don't have any quibbles with what folks have said, but we're not quite at business as usual because staff at the regional board in particular, and you are running really fast to deal with the UIC issues and the sump issue. Nothing's happening. A lot is happening.
I wouldn't call it business as usual.
Absolutely not.
We've ordered, we've asked, working with the Region 5, we've had 13267 orders to a number of operators about their wells. There's been a number of wells that have been shut down. There are still wells that are operating in a phase-out program that you heard about. And yes, the highest level, which are the highest priority, which are those that are close to any source of drinking water, are shut down as soon as we find them. The ones that are into higher quality aquifers have to be shut down. Those that are less than 3,000 TDS by October of this year. And then those that are in the 3,000 to 10,000 are the ones that have the longer time frame of a 2-year. And that's the phased approach that was proposed and agreed to by US EPA.
And where will we be getting the information on the drinking water wells that are going deeper, which was an issue that was raised?
So as part of our discussions with the USGS, they are our contractor that we hired to do the regional monitoring program. One of the tasks that we've asked them to do is start helping us with some of these data gaps and going out and actually gathering the data on water well information and digitizing that information so we have it ready to be available. One of the problems that we've had over the last year and a half is that it's hard to get our hands on all of the information about water wells. It's scattered and it's not electronic. And so we are putting a concerted effort into doing that once, of gathering that information, getting it electronic, and so that as we move forward in this process, we have that. It takes a little longer now, but it provides us with a resource as we move forward.
One other thing that was brought up, are we looking at mud sumps as well as just charge sumps?
So we will need to get back with you on the different ways. Different regional boards have different procedures for mud sumps. Drilling mud sumps are fairly common for all kinds of drilling activities. You use a mud to keep the borehole open, and so it's a thick, viscous stuff that you recirculate, and keep using you add bentonite and mud into it and you recirculate that. But I think there are different rules and regulations in different regional boards on the use of pits for that or not the use of pits for that. So we would need to get back to you on that.
Right. Well, this hearing is about the groundwater monitoring. Don't mean to distract. I mean, but it is helpful to have folks pose issues, and reasonable minds can differ. And clearly, we're going to continue following up on all of these.
That's
it's not
right.
a case closed by any.
And what we found, and I think you might have picked it up, is that what started in our minds is a fairly straightforward, you're going to look at monitoring associated with well stimulation activities, has shown us that it's not that simple. The well stimulation materials get joined with the production water, get moved around the oil fields. There is a lack of information about the occurrence of water and the quality of that water in close proximity to oil fields. And so we've had to broaden our thinking to be able to understand the system so that we could tell you information and interpret what we receive from the groundwater monitoring.
We're all on a steep learning curve, but a committed one. I thought today was very good. I know a number of people said, and I just thank you. There's a lot of, I don't know what the right word, it's not even conventional wisdom, but stuff that had been thrown out that is different that I learned today that is very helpful, because accuracy, although challenging, is the most important thing. So really appreciate it a lot to think about. I hope people learned a lot. I also appreciate all the hard work that you all have been putting in trying to develop a team and comply with SB4, which does give us the tools to learn far more about groundwater and groundwater quality than we have in many parts of the state. So unless it's already been declared a Superfund site. So I do actually.
And I just wanted to build on that I was struck by, with the new information, I'm sure you as a technician, John, about how there's overlap with the other new things we're working on, like the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and the type of information is being collected in that important enterprise. So I was certainly struck by some overlaps there and the need to communicate this type of information with those formations of the groundwater sustainability agencies. Thank you.
I'm probably at a pretty elementary level here, and so today was very helpful. And as folks were doing their presentations, I was looking through the website, and what strikes me is that what started off to be a concern about fracking, of course, has morphed into a much broader concern about a number of different activities. I think that a few fact sheets would be helpful, and so far anyway, I'm not finding anything that is very brief that goes through the different types of activities. I know that's probably a lot to put into one fact sheet, but just something very basic that then could redirect folks to links. There's a lot of good stuff on the website, but once you get into the program page, it gets detailed pretty quickly.
We'll work on it.
Other things? Well, this is to be continued with all of you. It's hardly the last word. Appreciate all of your kind attention. And with that, we will turn to the next item. Great. And, yes, and my apologies to the regional board. I am turning the chair over to my able vice chair because I have to be at a drought meeting.
Come on up. We're moving now to item number 12, the consideration of a proposed resolution approving an amendment to the Water Quality Control Plan for the North Coast region to establish a policy for the region-wide implementation of the water quality objectives for temperature